Hey, period 5. We are almost to the end of the book. This is chapter 14, which begins on page 161. So, where we last met the students, they were at the cabin. Bruce had just told Rita that Buck was indeed dead. Rita does not believe him, thinks that he's lying. And then Marianne heard a car motor coming up the mountain. So turn with me to page 161 and follow along as I read. From the front bedroom, Rita also heard the car engine. She must have been sitting there listening for it, Marianne thought, as the heavyset woman came hurrying into the living room. "It is Buck!" Rita exclaimed, throwing an accusing glance at Bruce. "I knew you were lying. Nothing could happen to Buck. Now you will get yours, you lying little boy." From his place by the fire, Bruce did not make the effort to contradict her. "It is Glenn," he thought he thought tiredly. "He got help. We all will be going home now." There was no particular joy in the thought. He was glad for the others. He had become fond of them during the time they had spent together. He wanted them to get home safely. For himself, however, the prospect was a painful one. The thought of seeing Glenn again, of returning with him to their home to pick up their lives as always, encumbered by his new and disillusioning knowledge of his brother's true character, was more than he could bear. "I wish I could go away," he thought. "Just pack up and go somewhere far away, to boarding school perhaps, or to a job of some kind. It wouldn't matter what it was, as long as it was a long way off." He was not surprised when he heard Marianne's voice exclaiming, "It's Glenn!" Of course it was Glenn. Glenn, the conqueror, returning with the police for the dramatic rescue. Then she added, "And Rod, and—" Her voice changed. "Oh, no!" "What is it?" Bruce raised his head. "It's the other man, Juan." Jessie has risen and gone to stand beside the girl at the window. "The one who got on the school bus with the pistol." "Bolt the door." Bruce began to scramble to his feet. "Don't let them in. With 4 of us here, we can have control of the house, as long as we keep Juan outside." But he was too late. Rita had already reached the door and thrown it wide, and was shouting out to the approaching 3. "Where is Buck? Didn't Buck come back with you?" They entered the cabin, scuffing snow across the rough boards of the floor. Rod's eyes flicked quickly about the room, finding Marianne in her position before the window. Automatically, he moved toward her. "Marianne, are you all right? They haven't hurt you?" The girl's face was blank with amazement. "What are you doing here, Rod? Did Glenn reach you? But that man, Juan, how did he—" "Where is Buck?" Rita demanded harshly. Her voice was beginning to take on a note of hysteria. "Why isn't he with you?" "How should I know where Buck is?" Juan returned. "Isn't he here? This is where he is supposed to be. This was his part of the job, keeping the kids under control. Here I find this boy," he gestured toward Glenn, "wandering down the road almost to the village. I, too, would like to know where your husband is gone." Glenn regarded the others defiantly. "I almost made it. I would have made it if your stepfather," he nodded at Marianne, "hadn't decided to give in and bring the ransom. I ran into him and Juan at the bottom of the hill, almost to the village." "You brought the ransom?" Marianne asked in bewilderment. "You brought it, Rod? But how? I didn't think—" "Of course I brought it," Rod lied. How long, he wondered, would it be before Juan turned to him, demanding the impossible, the money, and there was no money. He glanced quickly about, assessing the situation. Apparently, there was at the moment only one man in charge here, Juan, the one who had driven up with him. The woman must be part of it, and there was another man, this Buck, but according to the shreds of conversation between Juan and the woman, he was not here at the moment. Where was he? Coming back at any moment, perhaps? Did he have a gun? Did the woman? How many firearms were there in the picture besides Juan's? It was impossible to tell. His own pistol was heavy in his pocket. He resisted the urge to reach for it, to press his hand against the outside of his overcoat pocket, to feel through the cloth the reassuring hard shape. "All right," Juan said slowly. "I have kept my part of the bargain. I have brought you here. You see your daughter. She is all right. She has not been hurt. Now, I want the key. You will give it to me." "The key?" Rod repeated the word as though uncertain of its meaning. "The key to the trunk. You say the money is in the trunk of your car." Now, Rod thought, now is the time. As casually as possible, he began to move his hand toward his overcoat pocket. I can reach it, he thought, as though for the key. He would never be able to draw the gun forth in time, but he could fire through the cloth. So let's pause here for a moment. Firing through. Picture the gun in his overcoat pocket, down by his, thigh, perhaps. And Rod, who has never fired a gun before in his life, he's never ever fired a gun. If he were to try to fire the gun through the cloth of his pocket, how is that going to go, guys? Let's think about that. All right, let's continue. This is it, he thought, and then suddenly hesitated. Juan also was moving. You girl, he said, you come over here. You mean me? Jessie asked, but Juan was looking past her. With a sudden motion, he reached out and caught hold of Mary Ann's wrist. In a second's time, while Rod stood frozen, he had pulled the girl to him and was pressing her against him. The hand that held the pistol was against her side. All right, he said to Rod. No funny business now. You get the key. You take it and go out and unlock the car trunk. Then you come back in carrying the money with you. I'm going to watch you from the window. If there is anything wrong, your girl here, she is the one to get it. Not the others, but this one, this blonde one. Rod choked against the sickness rising within him. His stomach felt suddenly empty. I can't fire, he thought. A moment ago, just one moment ago, it might have worked. I waited too long. I am always waiting too long. Juan stood directly in front of him, in easy firing range, even through the cloth of the overcoat. Now, however, Mary Ann was between them. Her slender body formed a delicate barrier between the gun and the man for whom the bullet would be intended. Looking at her, at the small, pale face, the soft hair, Rod felt his heart turn over at the resemblance to her mother. There was, however, a difference as well. The blue eyes were not frightened or tearful as Marian's would have been. They blazed in anger. The girl's pretty face was twisted in revulsion. Let go of me, she muttered from between clenched teeth. Don't you dare put your hands on me, you horrid little man. Oh, a Spitfire we have here, yes? Juan's voice held amusement, but he did not move his eyes from Rod. Do not wiggle, little Spitfire, or I will have to hurt you. Let go of me, Mary Ann said savagely, twisting suddenly, and then her face went white and she doubled forward with a gasp of pain. Juan jabbed the barrel of the pistol a second time, hard into the tender area below the ribs, and the girl gasped again. In a rage of frustration, Rod clenched his fist, willing himself not to grab for the pistol. He could not fire, could not possibly pull the trigger without hitting the girl unless while she was doubled forward, but he could manage to hit Juan in the head or upper chest. But not being used to a pistol, he could not count upon his aim. Encumbered by the heavy cloth of the overcoat, it would be luck if he hit the man at all. It was a risk that could not be taken. Stand up, Juan commanded, and Mary Ann did so, dragging herself painfully erect, her face now drained of all color. Go out to the car, Juan ordered Rod, and get the money, now. First, I have to know about Buck, Rita spoke suddenly. You say you have not seen him. Where is he? He left this morning before dawn. He was going down the mountain looking for these boys. Her nod took in Glenn and Bruce. This boy, the little one here. He came back this morning, later. He said the car was wrecked. I did not believe him. I saw no wreck, Juan said. The car went over the cliff, Bruce said flatly, down where the road makes a hairpin. Glenn and I both saw it happen. It caught fire at the bottom. Watching the dawning belief coming into the woman's face, he felt a strange, inconsistent wave of pity. I told you before. Is it true? Rita demanded. Her eyes had a glassy look. She swung about to face Glenn. Is it? Yes, Glenn said. He tried to run down my brother. The car went out of control. He paused and then added as an afterthought, we did everything we could. We climbed down to the car to see if we could save him. By the time we got there, it was too late. What's wrong with that statement? Could it be perhaps the word we? Did Glenn go down and check on Buck? No, of course not. He told Bruce that was a ridiculous idea. He used the plural we with ease. Despite his new knowledge of his brother, Bruce listened to the lie with incredulous amazement. Is it true? Rita demanded again. Is it? She swung her gaze frantically from one to another of them, as though begging for reassurance. I don't know, Juan said. It does not matter. Right now what matters is the money. What do you mean it doesn't matter? Rita exclaimed wildly. How can you say it doesn't matter? It is the only thing that matters. If it is true, if Buck is dead, the money doesn't matter. Life doesn't matter. He wanted the money to buy me nice things. If there is no Buck, it doesn't matter about the nice things. Be still, Juan growled angrily. You idiot woman, be quiet. We all knew the risks when we got into this, Buck as well as me. You and Buck had an agreement. Buck was to do the thinking parts. He was to make the plans, to drive the bus, to take the children. But the rest of it, that was for you to do. We were to have nothing to do with the strong arm parts. If Buck was killed, it was while he was doing your work. She was out of control now. Her head thrown back, her face contorted, which means twisted out of shape. Her voice mounted higher and higher. If it is true, if Buck is dead, then it is your fault. What do you mean, my fault? Juan asked. I did not send him down the mountain. If he had had sense enough to keep the children here, he would not have had to go. This was his job, and he did not do it. Only a stupid man would... Don't you dare call him stupid! Don't you dare say anything about him! With a sudden shriek, Rita threw herself across the space between them. Her heavy body struck the man from the side. Her hands clawed in fury at his face. Don't you dare! Don't you dare! At the moment of impact, Mary Ann twisted away, hurling herself free as Juan's hands momentarily loosened their grip upon her. At the same instant, Rod's hand leaped for his pocket. This time, he did not hesitate. With a desperation born of his other lost opportunities, he jolted the pistol into position and squeezed the trigger. The shot was not a good one. It missed Juan completely, but the sound filled the room, freezing the occupants into immobility. Rita caught her breath, shocked back to sanity. Juan froze in an instant of motion, his own weapon raised. It was then that Bruce moved forward. What drove him to this action was something of which he would never be completely certain. He would have liked to have thought it was bravery, but his innate honesty would not allow this, for he believed that bravery is something that has to be contemplated. This movement was automatic, triggered by the realization within himself that someone was going to be injured. One gun had been fired, and the other was raised for action, and the stalling and arguing and hoping and plotting were now behind them. Somebody was going to get shot. Somebody. Mary Ann, or Jessie, or Glenn, or Mr. Donovan. And me as well, thought Bruce. Me as well as anyone. He was not a heavy boy, but he was wiry. There was the strength of desperation behind him as he raised his arm and brought the side of his hand down with a sharp, slicing motion onto Juan's wrist. There was an instant when the pistol seemed to hang there in the air suspended. It was with a sense of amazement that they heard the thud as it struck the floor. It was Glenn, of course, who reached it first and straightened to stand facing them. Tall and handsome, with the pistol held easily in his hand, he looked like the hero of an action movie. What's it like, Dexter had asked once, to have Superman for a brother? He does resemble him, Bruce thought now, with the inane reaction of restrained hysteria. With his head thrown back like that and his chest thrust out, all he needs is a cape. Don't move, you two, Glenn said, addressing Juan and Rita, but Rita did not seem to hear him. With a limp, defenseless movement, she lifted her hands to cover her face. For a moment, there was no sound in the room except the woman sobbing. Then Jessie said, I'm so sorry. It was a peculiar thing to say, but it was Jessie. She reached a hand out and touched the woman's shoulder. I am sorry, she said again. She is Jessie, Bruce thought, and Glenn is Glenn. But I am myself. I am Bruce Kirtland. I am and can be whatever I make of myself. It was a new thought, a strange one. He clung to it now with a fierceness which was in itself new to him. I am not a shadow, a follower. I am not Superman's little brother. I do not need to walk behind Glenn, to pick up after Glenn, to breathe with Glenn. What I am is within myself. I am Bruce. For what Glenn is, I am sorry, but it has nothing to do with what I am. He stood quiet, giddy with a sense of release as though a gigantic load had been lifted from his shoulders, a load that he had not even been aware of carrying. Glenn said to Juan, "Raise your hands above your head." His voice was strong, masterful. He glanced sideways to see Marianne's expression, but her eyes were not upon him. She had turned instead and crossed to Rod. "Honey, are you all right?" His voice was shaken with emotion. "How badly did he hurt you?" "I'm okay, Rod." She looked very small, standing there in front of him. "Rod, my father, why didn't he come with you? If you could come, why couldn't he? Why didn't he come to get me?" For a long moment, Rod stood gazing down at her, struggling with a decision. It was the moment he knew to tell her, to put into words once and forever the situation which her mother had carefully concealed from her. It was time to say, "Marianne, your father didn't come because he doesn't care about you. He has never cared about you, or about your mother or your brothers, or anyone in the world except himself." It was the time, in this moment of climax, and she would believe him. But now, standing, gazing down into the small, vulnerable face, he could not say it. Instead, he said, "We couldn't reach your father. You couldn't. Your mother didn't know where to find him. She would have called if she could have. If he had known about it, your father would have come after you. Nothing would have kept him away if he had known." But he did know. Marianne spoke the words flatly. "I heard Buck tell Rita about it. You left messages for him everywhere. He didn't answer them. He didn't want to come." "Honey," Rod regarded her helplessly. "He didn't care enough to come." Suddenly, to his astonishment, she threw herself against him, her face pressed against his chest, her shoulders shaking. The fair head, so like her mother's, was bent, her body racked with shuddering sobs. "He just didn't care." Clumsily, Rod stroked the bright head. "Honey," he said awkwardly, "everybody isn't the way we wish they were. Everybody has faults. Your father—" "I don't have a father." Marianne's voice was muffled against his chest. "I know it now. I have never really had a father." Rod stood, holding her, waiting for the storm to subside. "You have one now," he said. Aww. So maybe their relationship will change. Now we're changing settings to read the final chapter, which is chapter 15. And let me switch it back to Silver Church. And let's see how the story concludes. Page 172. On the way down the mountain, they stopped at the village to phone their parents. Glenn stayed behind at the cabin to stand guard over Juan and Rita. And to be there, Bruce thought wryly, when the police come. Trust Glenn not to miss out on something like that. Jessie completed her phone call and stepped out of the booth, her eyes still bright with the tears that had sprung to them at the sound of her mother's voice. Bruce reached out and touched her arm as she passed him. "Hey, Jessie," he said softly. "Did you see it? It's silver." "Yes, I know." She smiled at him, a joyful smile that shone through the tears like sunshine. Whoops, I forgot to change this. I guess it doesn't matter. For a moment they stood there, smiling at each other, bound together by the simple wonder of being alive. Then Bruce stepped into the booth to call his parents, and Jessie went back to the car and to Dexter. On the rise above them, the aluminum church glowed silver in the afternoon light. The end! That's the end! I know. I kind of wish that the ending would tell us a little bit more about these students. Are they lifelong friends because they have shared this moment, this experience together that no one else could understand? I'd like to believe that they do, but you can come to your own conclusions and the end. That's the end, guys. So that concludes Ransom. I hope you enjoyed it.